So where we left off on Thursday, the White Witch with Edmund and the dwarf are making their way to the stone table, and they have to ditch the sledge because the snow and ice are melting so quickly that the reindeer can no longer even pull it through the meadows. And while they're going through that problem, and what we left off with was on page 122, where we get this somewhat lengthy description, how there's no longer any fog, the sky is blue and blue and blue, trees are blossoming, flowers are blooming, etc. Meanwhile, the children and the beavers are making their way to the stone table, and they look off to the distance, they see the sea, and on page 125, they arrive at the stone table. And what they do in the film version is quite a bit different than what Lewis wrote in the novel. Because on 126, we see at the very top of the page, they saw what they had come to see. Aslan stood in the center of a crowd of creatures who had grouped themselves round him in the shape of a half moon. There were tree women there and well women, or dryads and naiads, as they used to be called in our world, who were playing stringed instruments. There's 4 great centaurs, okay? There's a unicorn, a bull with the head of a man, a pelican, an eagle, a great dog, and 2 leopards, one carrying his crown and the other carrying his standard, his pennant, his flag. But as for Aslan himself, the beavers and the children didn't know what to do or say when they saw him. People who have not been in Narnia sometimes think that a thing cannot be good and terrible at the same time. Okay? Notice what that implies. That a thing cannot be good and terrible at the same time. What is our narrator telling us about Aslan? Or you can pronounce it Aslan. Lewis said he pronounced it A-S-S-L-A-N, Aslan, but not as kind of a pronunciation. So what's he saying about Aslan? 1, he is good. But go back to the conversation the children had with the beavers. He's not tame. Doesn't mean he's wild, but it means he's not controlled by anyone or anything. He's like Tom Bombadil, he's his own person, if you've read The Lord of the Rings. So, if the children had ever thought so, they were cured of it now, for when they tried to look at Aslan's face, they just caught a glimpse of the gold mane and the great royal solemn overwhelming eyes, and then they found they couldn't look at him and went all trembly. They can't even look him in the face. They see the hair, they see the eyes, and then they cast their eyes down to the ground. So Mr. Beaver kind of spurs on Peter. Go on, you first. Peter says, no, you first. No, sons of Adam before animals. So Peter says, ladies first. Why are they doing this? They're afraid. I mean, he's a huge lion. Okay? So, Peter goes on up and says, we have come, Aslan. Aslan addresses them by name and says, where's the 4th? Mr. Beaver, he has tried to betray them. Join the White Witch, O Aslan. Okay? And then Peter volunteers. That was partly my fault. I was angry with him, and I think that helped him to go wrong. Why does Peter volunteer that?
Trying to save Edmund a little bit.
Okay. Trying to save Edmund a little bit. Why else? I think that's true. What's he doing in saying that? Or what's he accepting? Partially, at least.
Just like responsibility.
Responsibility. Blame. Okay? He's accepting some responsibility for why Edmund ran off to the White Witch. You have to go back to when they first enter Narnia. All 4 of them together. How does Peter treat Edmund once he realizes Edmund has been in Narnia before. When Edmund says, don't you think we should be making for the lamppost? So you have been in here. Okay? He treats him like dirt. Aslan says nothing. Notice, to excuse Peter or to blame him, but merely stood looking at him. And Lucy says, please, Aslan, can anything be done to save Edmund? All shall be done. What does Aslan mean there? Does he already know what's going to happen later on at the stone table? Not necessarily. He and the witch haven't had their little confab, haven't had their meeting. But what does he mean?
It's just going to be okay.
Yeah. Keep going.
Everything that can be done will be done.
Exactly. Whatever must be done will be done. Notice, it's not, I'll see what I can do. It's all shall be done. Whatever that entails. Okay? But it may be harder than you think. And then he was silent again for some time. Up to that moment, Lucy had been thinking how royal and strong and peaceful his face looked. Now, she perceives sadness in Aslan's face. But next moment, the sadness is gone. So Aslan takes Peter up to the hill, shows him Cair Paravel, the castle that he will reign in. Okay, Peter sees the ocean again. And while they are there, and Peter's kind of, surveying his kingdom, they hear a bugle call. And Aslan says, it's your sister's horn. She's only supposed to blow that horn when?
When she's in trouble.
When she's in trouble. So, Aslan starts running. He tells everybody to get back, let the prince win his spurs, meaning, let him fight. What does the win his spurs, though, suggest? What's going to happen as a result? Peter will be knighted, essentially. Okay? This is a trial by fire, as it were, or a trial by combat. So, Peter goes, he sees Susan hanging from the tree. She can't get up high enough, and the big giant wolf is snapping at her heels. And we're told, page 131. Peter did not feel very brave. Hopefully it's 131 in your books. Peter did not feel very brave. Indeed, he felt he was going to be sick. But that made no difference to what he had to do. He rushed straight up to the monster, aimed a slash of his sword at its side. But the wolf moves. Notice, Peter just rushes right in and swings his sword. Okay? Doesn't think strategy, doesn't think tactics. As it was, all this happened too quickly for Peter to think at all, he had just time to duck down and plunge his sword as hard as he could between the brute's forelegs and into its heart. Why? Because the wolf turns around and jumps. Then came a horrible, confused moment like something in a nightmare. He's tugging and pulling, and the wolf seems neither alive nor dead, but he does kill it. And this is Malgrim, or what in earlier versions of the story is called Fenris Ulf, okay, which ties this wolf in to Norse mythology. So Aslan says, there's two more, go get them. Okay. And he takes Peter's sword, tells him to clean it, Peter does. Peter hands the sword to Aslan, page 133, and Aslan says, kneel. Aslan strikes him with the flat of the blade and says, rise up, Sir Peter, Wolfsbane. Okay. So now he's been kind of inducted, as it were, into knighthood. Chapter 13, we go back to Edmund. Okay. So the dwarf and the queen start to realize they're not going to get to the stone table before Aslan. And so the queen starts to think, well, what happens if there's only 3 to sit on the thrones? Prophecy can't be fulfilled. If the prophecy can't be fulfilled, then her reign won't come to an end. Okay? She says, I would have liked to have done it on the stone table. That's where it's supposed to be done. So you get this idea that sacrifice or killing is what occurs at the stone table. But she says, we'll do it here. Okay? Edmund is rescued by Aslan's forces. The witch and the dwarf are overlooked because they look like a stump in a rock. And Edmund is taken back. The next morning, the children wake up and they hear that Edmund has been rescued. They go out, page 139, and they see Aslan and Edmund walking together in the dewy grass. There's no need to tell you, and no one ever heard what Aslan was saying, but it was a conversation which Edmund never forgot. And Aslan tells him when he brings Edmund to them, there is no need to talk to him about what is past. Why?
He's been forgiven.
Okay, he's been forgiven by Aslan at least.
I mean, what's in the past is in the past. Like, we just need to move on.
Exactly. Okay. And I hesitate to bring this in, but I think it's there. There's almost a hint that what Edmund and Aslan have been talking about are Edmund's misdeeds. Okay? And their walk together off in the grass, separate from everybody else, is like a confession. Okay? And whether it's in the Catholic Church or the Orthodox Church, what is said in the confessional, or what is said in confession, is never repeated to anybody else. Because once it's said, once it's confessed, it's done. It's over with. You never have to say confession for that particular thing ever again. Okay? Edmund has had his cleansing with Aslan. He comes back. Okay? And what happens? Edmund says, I'm sorry. They all say, that's all right. Okay? And it's never addressed. So, the witch desires an audience with Aslan. And Aslan says, grant her safe conduct. And the witch comes in, page 141. And notice, she says this in front of everybody. You have a traitor there, Aslan. Everybody knows she's talking about Edmund. Aslan says, his offense wasn't against you. In other words, so, who was his offense against? Ultimately, it was against Aslan. It was against Peter, Susan, and Lucy, but ultimately it was against Aslan. Why? What did he do?
He teamed up with the witch.
Okay. Keep going.
Follow where the Aslan was going to be.
Exactly. He went to the White Witch to tell her about Aslan. So she asked, have you forgotten the deep magic? He says, let's say I have. What is this deep magic? Tell you what is written on that very table of stone which stands beside us. Remember when they first arrived there, it's described as having kind of runic markings in it. They can't read what it says, but it has engraving on it. Tell you what is written in letters deep as a spear is long, on the firestones on the secret hill. We never find out about that secret hill anywhere in the Chronicles of Narnia, or what those firestones are. Tell you what is engraved on the scepter of the emperor beyond the sea. We never see the emperor beyond the sea, and we never see his scepter in the Chronicles of Narnia. You at least know the magic which the emperor put into Narnia at the very beginning. You know that every traitor belongs to me as my lawful prey. See? And if you've read The Magician's Nephew first, one of the things you know, which you don't know when you read this first, okay, is that Aslan created Narnia. He was there at the very beginning. Okay? So when she tells him this stuff, he's just kind of, she's telling him everything he already knows. But for we who've never been there before, if this is our first experience of reading it, that's not clear. You know that every traitor belongs to me as my lawful prey, and that for every treachery I have a right to a kill. Okay? So she says, that human creature is mine. His life is forfeit to me. His blood is my property. The bull, come and take it. Fool! Do you really think your master can rob me of my rights by mere force? In other words, can Aslan break the law that Narnia is built upon? He knows the deep magic better than that. He knows that unless I have blood, as the law says, all Narnia will be overturned and perish in fire and water. Aslan, it's very true. I do not deny it. Susan. Oh, Aslan, can't we? I mean, you won't, will you? Can't we? You won't, will you? What? Yeah. What did he already say to Lucy? All shall be done. Can't we do something about the deep magic? What is Susan asking?
To ignore the law.
Yeah, can't you ignore it? Can't you wave a wand? Can't you do some magic? Essentially. Can't you wave it somehow? Isn't there something you can work against it? Aslan turns to her with a frown on his face. Work against the Emperor's magic? What is she saying? Okay. Keep going, though.
It would tear apart Narnia. That's what Narnia is based upon.
She is saying, can't you work against the Emperor? Can't you somehow break what the Emperor has said? Can't you somehow disobey the Emperor to what? To save Edmund. And nobody ever made that suggestion to him again. Aslan tells them all to fall back, and he says, I'll talk to the witch alone. They do. He tells them they can come back, and he says, I've settled the matter. She has renounced, the claim on your brother's blood. Okay. Next chapter. Soon as the witch leaves, Aslan says, we need to move from this place. It will be needed tonight for other purposes, or wanted for other purposes. So they raise camp and leave. Susan and Lucy can't sleep on page 148. Lucy says there's something wrong about Aslan. Either some dreadful thing is going to happen to him or some dreadful thing he's going to do. And Susan says, he's been off, he's been wrong all afternoon. So they can't sleep, so they get up and decide to go find him. Okay? They follow him as he kind of retraces his steps from earlier in the day. He says, children, page 149, why are you following me? We couldn't sleep. Can we come with you wherever you are going? And he says, you can come if you stop when I tell you. Okay? So, he leads them almost to the stone table. He tells them to stop. They hide in the woods. He goes up to the queen and all of her evil forces. We get a description of what kind of people are with her. Cruels and hags and incubuses and wraiths and horrors and afrits and sprites and orkneys and woozes and ettins, etc. They shave him, cut his mane off. They bind him. They put him on the stone table. And the queen kills him. Page 155. And she speaks. And now who is won? Fool, did you think by all this you would save the human traitor? Now I will kill you instead of him, as our pact was, and so the deep magic will be appeased. But when you are dead, what will prevent me from killing him as well? Once you're dead, what's going to stop me from killing them all, is what she means. And who will take him out of my hand then? In other words, who will ransom him then? Who will be his savior then? Understand, you have given me Narnia forever. Okay? And you've lost your own life, you've not saved his. Okay? She kills him, they all leave. Except for Lucy and Susan. They stay and watch Aslan. As soon as they think it's safe, they go up to him. They kiss his cold face and his beautiful fur, what's left of it. And it really helps here, I think, if you've felt or seen a dead cat in the wild, or like a pet that you find outside in the morning. Why is his fur cold and wet? Dew has settled on it. It's cold because there's no heartbeat. There's no heat inside. The dew has settled on it because the body isn't warm enough to stop the dew from settling. So rigor mortis hasn't settled in, but there's nothing there left. So Susan, after they cry and cry, says, I wonder, could we untie him? That is, let's at least make him more like he was. But they can't. The cords are too tight. And then they see the mice. And at first they're disgusted. But then they realize the mice are chewing away at the bonds. And they relieve him of those bonds. And the girls walk around. Why? Because it's just before sunrise, which means it's the coldest time of the day. And so they're walking around to get warm. The sky in the east was whitish by now. The stars were getting fainter. All except for one, very big one, low down on the eastern horizon. They move the ropes away. Okay. They walk to the eastern edge of the hill. They're looking down towards the sea and towards the country below them. The country all looked dark gray, but beyond, at the very edge of the world, the sea showed pale. The sky begins to turn red. They're looking, they see the countryside, off in the distance the ocean and the horizon. And they see, just as the edge of the sun breaks the horizon. Then at last, as they stood for a moment looking out towards the sea in Cair-Paravel, the red turned to gold along the line where the sea and the sky met, and very slowly up came the edge of the sun, and then they hear a giant, great, cracking noise, almost like thunder. Lucy, what's that? Susan, I feel afraid to turn around. Something awful is happening. What does she mean by awful? Something horrible? She might have that meaning. She might also mean awful as in full of awe. Something that is a wonder to behold. Lucy, they're doing something worse to him. And they turn. And the rising of the sun, now at their backs, okay, made everything look so different. All the colors and shadows were changed, that for a moment they didn't see the important thing. They're now facing the stone table. But because the sun has just risen, they see all these trees and the grass, okay, colored with light. And they don't see the table at first. And then they do. And it's cracked into two pieces that run down from end to end along its length, right down the center. So now it's laying like this, okay, with a big crack down the middle. Where's Aslan? Susan, who's done it? What does it mean? Is it more magic? And now they hear a voice behind their backs. Yes, it is more magic. And there, shining in the sunrise, so Aslan is standing there. The sun is coming up right behind him. So what does he have around him?
Like a halo.
What is it?
Like a halo. Okay? In iconography, which is the study of icons, this is called a nimbus. Okay? It's gold light all around him. All right? There, shining in the sunrise, larger than they had seen him before, shaking his mane, stood Aslan himself. Lucy, aren't you dead then? Not now. Susan, you're not she's going to say ghost, but she doesn't. Aslan stoops his golden head, licks her forehead. What does that mean? Ghosts don't lick. Ghosts don't have tongues. The warmth of his breath and a rich sort of smell that seemed to hang about his hair came all over her. In other words, he doesn't have a wild, dirty, lionish smell. Okay? And he says, do I look it? Do I look at what? Do I look like a ghost? Okay? Even though she didn't say the word. Lucy, oh, you're real. You're real. Oh, Aslan. Susan, but what does it all mean? In other words, how? Explain, please. Aslan, it means that though the witch knew the deep magic, there is a magic deeper still which she did not know. This is the deeper magic from before the dawn of time. Her knowledge goes back only to the dawn of time, but if she could have looked a little further back. Okay? You know, and here you could use the Big Bang as an example. What, if the Big Bang is true, what happens at the Big Bang? Time begins then. And what Aslan's saying is, if she could go back to, and notice, language fails. Go back to what? 5 minutes before the Big Bang. Well, there aren't 5 minutes before the Big Bang. Why? Because time begins with the Big Bang. Okay? So, if she could have looked a little further back, notice he doesn't say in a time frame, into the stillness and the darkness before time dawned, she would have read there a different incantation. She would have known that when a willing victim who had committed no treachery was killed in a traitor's stead, the table would crack and death itself would start working backward. Now think about that for a moment. Death starts working backward. Where does that stop? Or does it? Okay? Think of it this way. 10 minutes prior, Aslan was dead, right? How dead was he? This is kind of a Princess Bride question. He was not mostly dead. He was all dead, completely dead. How long would he have remained dead had it not been for the deeper magic from before the dawn of time? He would have remained dead forever because dead things, basic law of thermodynamics, tend to remain dead. Okay? This table will not become alive because it is dead. Go to any cemetery in town and dig up a body, and that body's going to stay dead no matter how long you look at it. Okay? But take what he says now. A willing victim who sacrifices himself for somebody else, what happens to time? It starts working backwards. Okay? So the body that was dead for 10 minutes is now dead for 9 minutes, and 8 minutes, and 7 minutes, and 6 minutes, and 5 minutes, and 4 minutes, and 3 minutes, and 2 minutes, and then it's no longer dead. Okay? But is it just no longer dead? It's the exact opposite of being dead. That doesn't mean being alive. Because what's the opposite of being dead? Okay, you're really close.
Reborn.
Reborn.
Okay, being reborn. Almost there. Let me put it this way. This is going to be a bad analogy. Okay, I'm using it intentionally because it's not what happens to Aslan. If you accept the story of Lazarus in the New Testament, Lazarus was dead, buried in the tomb for 4 days. Jesus goes, says, move away the stone, and his sisters say, whoa, 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 no, because he's going to stink. He says, move the stone away. He calls Lazarus forth. He raises Lazarus from the dead. Okay. This is not, however, time working backwards. This is Christ intervening. Okay. Does Lazarus die again? Yes, he does. He doesn't live forever from that point on. None of the people that Jesus raises from the dead, the widow of Nain's son, Jairus' daughter, they don't go on and live forever. They're not off in some cloud somewhere. Okay? They die again. But with Aslan, when time works backwards, he what? He, to use the language Christ uses in the New Testament, he has life in abundance, meaning he can't die from that point on. Exactly. Okay? He can't die from that point on. He is now full of life. He is overflowing with life. How do we know? What are we going to see very, very shortly?
He's gonna go to the stone statues and breathe life into them.
He's going to go to the stone statues and breathe on them. What does God do at the beginning of Genesis, after he forms man of the dust of the earth? He breathes into him. Okay? What does, test your Sunday school knowledge, what happens at Pentecost? The gift of the Holy Spirit is breathed, okay, into the church. Okay? So, Lucy says, when Aslan says, now, Lucy says, yes, now. Notice, she's excited. She's like a kid at Christmas. He says, I feel my strength coming back to me. Catch me if you can. So they start to play. Okay? And then he roars, and he tells them, you better close your ears, because it's going to be the loudest roar Narnia has ever heard. And then they jump on his back, and he takes them to the queen's house. And we're told, chapter 16, Susan says, Aslan's doing something. He was indeed. He bounded up to the stone lion and breathed on him. And then he goes to he goes to the stone dwarf. And Lucy says, look at the lion. And what happens? Like a tiny streak of flame creeping along the edge of the newspaper. For a second after Aslan had breathed upon him, the stone lion looked just the same. Then a tiny streak of gold begins to run along his white marble back. It's being restored. The color licks over him like flame licking over a paper. Okay? And he's alive. And they go through the entire castle, and Aslan brings all of them back to life. Okay? Including Mr. Tumnus. So, Aslan leads his army, okay, to go help Peter and Edmund and the rest of the forces of Narnia. And we're told, page 176. They arrive at the battle. They see Peter and Edmund, all the rest of Aslan's army, fighting desperately against the crowd of creatures, etc., etc. Peter's army is not doing well because there's statues all over the place. Okay? It's apparent the witch had been using her wand. Now she's fighting Peter. And Aslan says, "Off my back, children." And with a roar that shook all Narnia from the western lamppost to the shores of the eastern sea, the great beast flung himself upon the white witch. Lucy saw her face lifted toward him for 1 second with an expression of terror and amazement. Terror? Why?
It's from the dead.
Okay, I think that's the amazement. I think the amazement comes from, he's dead. I think the terror comes from, I'm dead. Okay? The lion and witch had rolled over together, but with the witch underneath, and at the same moment all warlike creatures whom Aslan had led from the witch's house rushed madly on the enemy lions, dwarves with their battle axes, dogs with teeth, giant with his club. Peter's army cheered, and the queen's army essentially gave up. What happened to the queen? Dead. Okay? And Peter says it was all Edmund's doing. Not talking about the traitor. We'd have been beaten if it hadn't been for him, which was turning our troops into stone right and left. But nothing would stop him. He fought his way through 3 ogres to where she was just turning one of your leopards into a statue. And what did he do? Does he go for her head like Beowulf and the dragon? No.
That's from the wand.
He sees what's decimating his army, and he smashes the wand. Okay? And they find Edmund later on in charge of Mrs. Beaver, because Edmund's not doing well. Okay? And Lucy heals him and waits. And Aslan says, page 179, there are other people wounded. Yes, I know. Wait a minute. Daughter of Eve, others also at the point of death. Must more people die for Edmund? Okay, notice what he is suggesting there. People have died for Edmund. Is it only Aslan that died for Edmund? No, the battle. Would the battle have occurred if Edmund had not turned traitor? No, because the queen never would have come into Aslan's presence once he had the 4 sons and daughters of Adam and Eve together. So she goes off and heals them. Page 180. Lucy to Susan. Does he know what Aslan did for him? Talking about Edmund. Does he know what the arrangement with the witch really was? Shh, no, of course not. Lucy, oughtn't he to be told? Susan, surely not. It would be too awful for him. Think how you feel if you were he. And we could get all theological here if we wanted to, but I'm not going to. Okay? Edmund, Susan says, shouldn't be told. Why? How would it make him feel? Okay? How would it make him feel? Lucy, all the same, I think he ought to know. Why does Lucy think Edmund should know? You're alive, Edmund, because Aslan died for you. Okay? What does that mean then for Edmund and his life? If Lucy were to tell him that. Is it borrowed? Does he owe his life to someone else? Oh, yeah. Okay. So, Aslan takes them to Cair Paravel, and the children are crowned kings and queens. And we're told, page 182, amid all these rejoicing, Aslan himself quietly slipped away. And when the kings and queens noticed it, They said nothing about it, for Mr. Beaver had warned them. He'll be coming and going. One day you'll see him, another you won't. He doesn't like being tied down, and of course he's other countries to attend to. It's quite all right. He'll often drop in. Only you mustn't press him. He's wild, you know, not like a tame lion. Now, what does Mr. Beaver mean by other countries to attend to? Does he mean other countries in the world of Narnia? Surface level meaning, yes. Subtext level meaning, no. He means other worlds to attend to. Okay? So, story's almost over. And notice what we hear about these kings and queens. Middle of page 183. They made good laws and kept the peace and saved good trees from being unnecessarily cut down. They didn't just wantonly destroy trees. And liberated young dwarves and young satyrs from being sent to school. Okay? And generally stopped busybodies and interferers and encouraged ordinary people who wanted to live and let live. In other words, what kind of reign do Peter, Susan, Edmund, and Lucy practice? What kind of government do they have over the people of Narnia? People meaning humans and animals. They leave them alone for the most part. That whole thing about they stop interfering busybodies and they let them, what was the phrase? They let ordinary people who wanted to live and let live. To just go on about their own little ordinary daily lives. Without interference. Without being told, this is wrong, this is right. Okay? They lived a long life. They go off hunting for the white stag. Notice they're now fully adult. And they see the lamppost, and they go off to the lamppost, and then they realize, notice, before they had gone more than 20 paces, they're not walking through branches now, but through coats. Was it 20 paces from the wardrobe to the lamppost when they came in? No, it wasn't. It was a lot longer than that. Okay? And they burst out of the wardrobe, and it's the same day and the same hour of the day on which they had all gone into the wardrobe to hide. How many years had gone by?
No.
It's not implied, or it's not explicitly stated, but it's kind of implied they're in their 30s or 40s when they're on this hunt. So they've been there minimum 20 years, probably about 25 years. Okay? They get back in, and it's the same hour that they left. It might be 45 minutes later, but 25 years, let's say, to 45 minutes. And that would have been the very end of the story if it hadn't been that they felt they really must explain to the professor why 4 of the coats out of his wardrobe were missing. And he told them, and the professor, who was a very remarkable man, didn't tell them not to be silly or not to tell lies, but believe the whole story. And notice what he says. No, I don't think it will be any good trying to get back through the wardrobe door to get the coats. Does he really mean that he thinks they might try to go through the wardrobe door to get the coats? No. Why might they try to go through the wardrobe door? Yeah. You won't get into Narnia again by that route. Nor would the coats be much use by now if you did, eh? Why?
Because time passes differently over there.
Yeah, because maybe another 20 or 25 years has gone by. What's happened to the coats? Okay, they probably rotted if they're hanging on the branches. What's that? Yes, of course you'll get back to Narnia again someday. Once a king in Narnia, always a king in Narnia. Who said that before? Aslan. How does the professor know that? We don't know when we read this book first. That's one of the things that you get to that and you want to go, wait, how did he know that? I'm going to read the next book. If you read The Magician's Nephew first, you know exactly why the professor knows that. Okay? So it's not a surprise. But don't go trying to use the same route twice. Indeed, don't try to get there at all. It'll happen when you're not looking for it. And don't talk too much about it even among yourselves. Don't mention it to anyone else unless you find that they've had adventures of the same sort yourselves. How will you know? Oh, you'll know. Odd things they say, their looks. Keep your eyes open. Okay? So why does he say don't try to get back into Narnia?
Because you probably won't.
Okay, because you probably won't. C.S. Lewis, in his autobiography of his early life called Surprised by Joy, okay, focuses on this idea of joy. And what he says, what he relates there, is that when he was fairly young, he had an experience once where he and his brother were at their home. This was in Ireland. And they were looking out towards these mountains that they could see off in the distance. And he had this sudden desire just kind of wash over him. Or this sudden sense of longing. He didn't know what it was for. That is, it wasn't that he wanted the mountains, or that he wanted to go to the mountains. It was just this heartache that he felt like something was missing. Okay? But it wasn't painful. It was a wonderful experience. And he goes on and he tries to manufacture that experience. He later on calls this experience by its German name Sehnsucht, okay, which means desire or longing, okay? And what the professor's talking about here is you can't manufacture this. You can't create this on your own. And whether you're conscious of it or not, every one of you has had this kind of experience. Okay? It might be something where you see a sunset and you're just filled with a sense of awe or a strange sense that you can't even put into words. And you want to have it again. And so you start to try looking for it. You look at sunsets. You look at other things of natural beauty. And it's not the same. Okay? This desire, this longing, fills all of Lewis's writing. Okay? And what he ultimately comes to is there's only one thing that fills it. I'm not going to tell you what it is. Find out for yourselves what it is. Okay? In fact, it's the same thing that St. Augustine said. Everyone is born with a something sized hole in them. And it's the job of our lives to find out what's missing. You know, Bono's song, U2. I still haven't found what I've been searching for. Search for it every place. Haven't found it yet. Okay? All right, we'll stop there. Like I said, I'll have the exam on Thursday. And Thursday we will start The Dark is Rising. Do as much of it as we can.